Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight are legislators who are going to talk with us about some of the programs that were the subject of bills and legislation this year, and also part of the veto session that was just held. Joining me is Delegate Ken Plum, the longest serving member of the House of Delegates, Delegate Dan Helmer, who represents Western Fairfax County and part of Prince William County, and Senator Barbara Favola of Arlington. Welcome, all of you, to Inside Scoop. It's been an interesting session. Since the last session, we have a new governor. We have a slim majority in the House that is now Republican controlled. A lot of that impacted committees as far as who was on the committees and the legislation that got out of the committees. And then in the Senate, we have a slim margin of Democrats that have been a brick wall to some of the worst ideas coming out of the Virginia General Assembly this year. So I'll go ahead and just pitch this one to you, Ken, because I don't know of anyone who's worked longer with John Horsch of SALT, Social Action Linking Together, on programs like TANF and the Earned Income Tax Credit, trying to get a fully refunded Virginia Earned Income Tax Credit, and also the fact that there were increases built in to TANF in the last legislative session that would, over a period of years, increase. And so tell us, Ken, where we are with some of these pieces of legislation that you have worked on for so many years.
Well, Catherine, good to be with you again, and thank you for the advocacy you do on behalf of not only the programs in Richmond, but our local government as well. It's good to be with you. And John Horsch, he's an icon. I had a resolution passed for him in the General Assembly some years ago, commending him on the tremendous service that he's provided. No better expert that I know on human service programs and services than John Horsch. My fond recollection of John a couple of decades ago was before we had the email and internet connections and so on. John had a fax machine, and I would regularly, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, get a really fat envelope with stuff in it of articles and background information and so on that John had copied, and he would either fax it to me, and most instances he would mail it to me. But he was on top of the situation. He knew firsthand and was, in fact, a pioneer advocating for programs like TANF. I wish I could be more definitive in answering some of your questions tonight, but the fact of the matter is that the legislature, while it has officially adjourned its regular session, really is actually kind of still in session because we had not yet passed the conference report on the budget. To put in perspective, though, where this session is, in addition to what you've mentioned in terms of the change of majority, I would have to point out that 2 years ago, leading up to the current situation, Virginia had the most transformative legislative session in the history, I think, of Virginia General Assembly. It was truly transformative in terms of response to human needs and services, changing laws that took out discriminatory language and, in fact, discrimination against all kinds of vulnerable citizens, and set us on the road towards being able to respond more adequately to programs. What intervened in the meantime, of course, was COVID and the pandemic, and that changed a whole lot of things. And one would have thought that the pandemic would have resulted in government not being able to be as supportive as it might be to programs and services. But the fact of the matter is, we've been doing quite well economically. We have done well in terms of our tax revenue, and most assuredly, we did really well with the federal support programs that brought additional revenue into the Commonwealth. Now, some people would say you're running a surplus, but I would point out to people, when you have unmet needs, you hardly can have a surplus. What you have are some unappropriated revenues that we need to now make hard decisions on. The difficulty that we face now is that we've got some people, including the governor, who thinks we ought to give the money back, that we ought to have tax cuts. And heavens knows I'm all in favor of that when we've got money available for tax cuts and so on. But the fact of the matter is we've been setting aside increases in programs like TANF over the decades to where with regular inflation levels, people in need have fallen further behind. And so the conferees now are arm wrestling and have been for the last several weeks to try to come to some kind of compromise between the governor's desire to have tax cuts and the majority view, certainly, I believe, and Barbara can correct me if I'm mistaken, the majority view in the Senate and a minority view in the House, but a strong one, that we ought to do better by way of programs and services. Now, I have maintained for a long time that Virginia's progressive or lack of progressiveness in its income tax hurts our most vulnerable citizens. And one of the things we ought to be looking at, in addition to some programs, is that we ought to be looking at the way we collect our taxes. And I have proposed over on several occasions what many people call the fairest way to make the income tax fairer to people who have limited income, and that's the earned income tax credit and being able to make it refundable. In the past, the explanation for not doing that was we didn't have the money. And now the explanation is, well, we've got money, but we ought to just give it back to citizens. But when we do that, what we do is, again, reward people who have money, and we leave our most vulnerable citizens still in the lurch. So I'm not as definitive in terms of where we are as I'd like to be, Catherine, but the fact of the matter is, I'm not sure where we are. But maybe my two colleagues can clear it all up and make it absolutely clear for people where we stand.
Well, so I'll pitch it to your fellow delegate, Dan Helmer, to talk about some of what you've seen in the House this year around some of these issues. I know that John said that Virginia is one of the stingiest states when it comes to TANF, which is why they built in these step increases over a period of years. And that's in jeopardy because the budget, I mean, I think a lot of people don't even understand the biennium budget and how budgets are different in Virginia, that the outgoing governor presents a budget to the incoming governor. And right now we don't have one. So if you'd like to speak to that, Dan.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Well, I'll reiterate what you said is nobody's been working on these issues longer or harder than Delegate Ken Plum. And so it's been learned so much by serving as his colleague in the House. All of us on this call, and I think most Virginians, share a belief that in Virginia, you shouldn't have to go to sleep hungry. You should be able to get medical care if you need it. Your kids ought to be able to go to school and be healthy there, and you ought to be able to obtain a higher education. And I'll reiterate what some of Delegate Plum said, that the last 2 years in Virginia have been transformative on that front. And despite the discussion about the budget right now, I'd love to talk about some of the things we have accomplished on a bipartisan basis. Last year, we worked jointly on a bill, which I was able to get passed, that expanded eligibility for food assistance, what we call the SNAP program, to 200% of the federal poverty level. You talked about us being one of the stingiest states in the country, and we were. We were 47th, 48th in terms of food assistance. And that bill single-handedly meant that 150,000 Virginians qualified to put food on their table that wouldn't otherwise qualify. And we did it just in time, given the economic impacts of COVID. We also did some things as recently as this year, which have passed, despite some of the things I'm going to talk about that the governor did. In the past, as far as TANF goes, one of the things we believe is that people in Virginia who can work ought to work. And I believe that, and I think everybody on the call believes that. But we were doing some things where actually pushing people back onto public assistance that didn't need to be there if only we gave them a chance. And so we had a program. We have a program called the VIEW program. And that VIEW program is meant to help people who didn't get their high school degree, didn't get their diploma, need some sort of limited education to get back in the workforce, to go ahead and do that, to give them time. Problem is, it's a 2-year program. And at the end of that program, you no longer qualify for cash assistance for TANF. And so the problem with that is that we know that for a huge number of jobs, 2/3 of jobs in Virginia, they require higher education, a degree of some sort. And so by pushing people off at the 2-year mark who are working towards a degree, what we were doing is ensuring that they couldn't do the kind of jobs that would ensure that they would be able to live in dignity, to work and stay off of public assistance. And so this year, with the assistance of folks like Senator Favola, with Delegate Plum, and with others, we were able to pass on a bipartisan basis a change in the law that said, hey, look, if you're going to school full time, you're earning a degree, you're doing the kind of things that mean you're going to have a meaningful job. We're going to allow you to keep doing that. We're not going to kick you off after 2 years. And so just in those two bills over the course of the last 2 years, we've put tens of thousands of students, given them the ability to finish school, and over 100,000 Virginians who now qualify for food assistance can stay in school, can stay healthy, can keep a job, can stay in the workforce. And this is great news. And all of it, this is the worst part. Our laws, we're doing it despite the fact that the federal government gives us this assistance at almost no cost to Virginia. So every one of those dollars that's doing that goes right back into the Virginia economy and creates jobs. Now, all that's the great news. The bad news, though, is we have a governor who's showing real signs of not caring about those who are suffering the most in this economy. And if you look at this veto session that you just talked about, two of the bills that he vetoed are really, really going to hurt working Virginians. One of them that he vetoed says if you've got medical debt, and by the way, 90% of medical debt is erroneous. Those hospital bills are wrong, drive so many people into poverty and bankruptcy. And this guy vetoed it. That's what happens when you have a billionaire governor who doesn't care about the lives of working families. The second piece is we had a bill that dealt with slumlords. And again, how they evict, how they take care of people. And once again, this governor, so out of touch, ran with that red vest, said he was going to be a moderate, said he was going to help people out. And when it comes to like making sure they can afford to live or they can afford to keep a house, pulled the rug right under them with a veto. And 52 Republicans voted to sustain that veto. That's just not what we're about here. And I think there's a lot of work left to be done for poor Virginians here.
I think you're absolutely right. And earlier today, I was listening to Pod Virginia, which I think is a great podcast, and they were talking about both of those bills, and especially the slumlord bill that would, allow localities to force landlords to actually fix the problem and not just fine them. Fining a landlord is not solving the problem of mold or rats or plumbing or the things people are paying rent to live in substandard housing. And it is perplexing to understand, what the governor's agenda actually is. I don't know. It's very mysterious to me. So perhaps Senator Favola can provide some insight, because you're in a different chamber, different makeup, but the Democrats are in the majority, and you all did some heavy lifting this session and in the veto session too. Help us to understand what you think is happening here with the governor's agenda.
That's a great question, Catherine. It's a question that I don't have an answer to. First, let me just say I want to give great kudos to Delegate Ken Plum and Delegate Dan Helmer. They have been wonderful, steady, articulate, passionate voices for a progressive agenda in the House of Delegates. So I want to thank them publicly. They've had a much more challenging environment to work in than I have had. So when you switch to the Senate, we have 21 Democratic senators, 19 Republican senators. Of course, the lieutenant governor is Republican. So the challenge the Senate had was really defeating some very hurtful pieces of legislation that passed the House of Delegates on really a party line vote. And we defeated those proposals in committee, because if you only have a 1-vote margin on the floor, you really don't want to take a lot of chances with your vote count at that point. So that our action really was less on the floor and much more in the committee deliberations. And a lot of the sort of hot button issues that we have seen in the past that, I think have caused a lot of divisive conversations came up again. We had a lot of bills that, again, passed the House that I think intended to remove our gun safety provisions that we passed, just 2 years ago, the red flag bill, which we know has been used throughout the Commonwealth and has, in fact, removed firearms from individuals who were suicidal and were, at a point where they certainly could harm themselves. So, to try to roll that back, to me, is just unconscionable. And then, of course, we had bills trying to limit women's access to health care, abortion care, and we were able to defeat those bills. And we had bills that made it more difficult for voters to vote. So again, some of the progress we had made 2 years ago in really empowering people to vote, making it easier to get people to the polls, we saw a lot of proposals that reversed those gains. So that was sort of the general backdrop. We did have successes, and we did have some bipartisan support here and there. The big elephant in the room is the budget. There's a $3 billion difference between the Senate budget and the House budget. And those differences evolve around increases in teacher pay. The Senate has a 5% increase for each of the next 2 years. So that means there'd be enough state money to pay a 5% increase for each of the 2 years, and localities would have to draw it down. And then in human services, at-risk school funding, the Senate has like 256 million, and the House budget has almost next to nothing, less than 50 million. As an example, we also have much more of a safety net in the Senate budget. And one very important thing I want to bring up, and then I will speak to something that builds on Senator Helmer's efforts. But let me first say, you all, SALT, John Horsch, the faith community, the business community, so many advocates and so many people who really care about providing access to health care. So many of you helped us pass Medicaid expansion 2 years ago. And what has happened is we are now under a federal public health emergency, which is set to expire in July. And what most people don't know is every recipient on Medicaid or the Medicaid expansion program, which is part of Medicaid, must reapply to be eligible for Medicaid once that federal emergency resolution expires. That's a big deal. People don't easily reapply for programs. They can fall through the cracks, and we are talking about their health care. The Senate budget has language which actually sets up a task force to make that a smooth transition, to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks. That language is not in the House budget. So I beg folks to talk to the budget conferees. It is absolutely critical that we have some type of process to enable folks to re-enroll without losing services, healthcare services. And then I guess to the point that Delegate Helmer was making, he very passionately talked about our most vulnerable needing to continue with their education and still receiving childcare and some economic support while they were going to school, because the goal of our safety net programs needs to be making people self-sufficient, needs to be enabling them to provide for themselves and their families. And what is coming into effect now, because regulations are in place and the budget was passed 2 years ago, the G3 program, Get Skilled, Get a Job, and Give Back. And what you need to know is some of our dreamers who have graduated from our public high schools, have lived here at least 2 years, graduated from a Virginia high school, can demonstrate that their parents have paid income tax for the last 2 years, are eligible to go to our community colleges at no cost if their family household income is less than 400% of the federal poverty level. And that's about $100,000. So many of our, recent immigrant children, our DACA kids, will be able to participate in this program. The no cost element, of course, relates to high need workforce tracks, which we have defined very generously. So, it'd be anything in the education teacher prep programs, anything in the medical field or nursing or technology or computers or any STEM related, also mental health, behavioral health. So there's quite a range of program tracks that a young person could go to the community college. Again, they will more than likely qualify and not have to pay out of pocket. So that is a real, I think, opportunity. That's a real, again, I'll use the word opportunity to find a pathway for your dreams, to be able to contribute, after your education, to be a part of our growing economy. And I'm very excited about that, the G3 program. So I will stop there. There are two painful vetoes that I would like to talk about, if you believe I have enough time.
Sure.
Okay. Two things that really I think I talk about quite a bit. We had a bill that would have directed just a study to determine what barriers exist for the state to allow inmates to apply for SNAP before they're released. And that bill was vetoed. And there was no real reason to veto that bill. We all know that 90% of our offenders are actually released into our communities after they've done their time. And to ensure that recidivism doesn't take place, our offenders need a safety net. Their families need a safety net. So to allow them to apply for SNAP before they're released from jail is a big deal. And I would have hoped the governor allowed that study to go forward, but he did not. And then the other bill, which again, very important to SALT and other sort of social justice groups, Patrick Cope had a bill which would have established, again, a stakeholder group to study the benefits of moving the Department of Juvenile Justice out of Department of Corrections and into the Department of Social Services. So our youth would truly get wraparound services, and we could embrace the statutory intent of rehabilitating our young people who come into contact with the court system. But that bill was vetoed as well. So,
that was kind of perplexing, that bill, because it was a study.
It was a study,
and the governor seems to have come back to say, just do a bill. There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of chatter in the media and elsewhere about how Governor Youngkin really doesn't understand how government works, and that he certainly doesn't seem to understand how longstanding traditions of the way legislation is made and the way, how to make a bill, Schoolhouse Rock, that he doesn't seem to understand this process. And so you wonder what's at the base of some of this, whether it's simply he doesn't know, or whether it's intentional and this is just what he's going to do. And so there's been a lot of conversation around that. This is his first year. He's not ever held elected office. To my knowledge, he's not ever been engaged in the legislative process. So I can understand why people are asking this question. The one thing I want to do before we go to break, we've got about 5 minutes, Dan. I want to talk a little bit about the food program. We've talked about incarcerated individuals, very important, and jobs training is part of TANF. But can we talk just a minute about school lunches too? And the fact that, I don't know why the idea that children should go to school and be fed a lunch, whether their parents can afford to pay for it or not, is so controversial. But it's something that impedes young children's ability to be able to get an education, just being able to get a meal. So I know you've done some work in this area. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Catherine, for that tee up. I mean, this is, first of all, in addition to acknowledging my colleagues on here, I will say that Delegate Danica Rome as well has just been a phenomenal advocate on behalf of students being able to get breakfast and lunch at school and to do those while still maintaining a sense of dignity while not being shamed. And I think that's so important. We know from numerous studies that Children who are hungry at school perform less well academically, and it begins a vicious cycle. You perform less well academically, you are more likely to graduate school without the grades and knowledge that allow you to get ahead. Not allowing you to have the grades and knowledge to get ahead and get a well-paying job means you're more likely to be relying on the future on public assistance. And I'll echo what Senator Favola said, in which I know Delegate Plum also believes, that all of us believe in allowing Virginians to be self-sufficient, and that the public safety net is meant to be a key component of that. In terms of school lunches and breakfast, we've done a number of really important things around school breakfast and lunch here. First of all, that bill I mentioned on SNAP from last year that increased access to SNAP to about 150,000 people, 25,000 families. Every child in those 25,000 families now automatically qualifies for free meals at school. So if you can imagine the impact, you had all these children whose parents made just enough money to be really poor, but not really, really, really poor. And they were going to school and they weren't automatically qualified for a free lunch and free breakfast. Now they are. We've done a lot of work on school debt. So making sure that you aren't just piling up school debt. We're not using school debt as a way to deny you access to other services at school. And so I think there's been a sea change, and I like to think it's been shared on both sides of the aisle, that we believe that you should be able to get a good education no matter your parents' economic background. And we're trying to move in that direction in Virginia. And one of the things that's so sad about what the governor has done is he's cut through some of this bipartisan consensus with some very divisive policies that are going to leave so many Virginians behind, whether it's saddled with medical debt, whether it's evicted from their homes, whether it's not able to access these programs. Then instead of building a Virginia that works for all of us, he's just building a Virginia that works for a very few of us. And I know that all of us on this show are really committed to making sure we stand up to that and we build a Virginia that's for everybody.
And I appreciate that. And John Horsch definitely has been sort of the poor people's lobbyist for about 40 years. And you're fairly new to the legislature, Dan, and Ken's the longest serving, and Senator Favola's been there for a long time. But, these issues never seem to go away. We incrementally chip away trying to make it better for children and immigrants and new Americans and the formerly incarcerated. And it seems like every legislative session, we're chipping away at it. We're going to go to a short break, and we'll come back to discuss some of these issues more in depth. So stay with us at home. You're watching Inside Scoop, and we are doing a legislative wrap-up on some of the issues that affect and impact some of the most vulnerable Virginians in our communities across the Commonwealth. So join us after the break.
Caitlin, be serious. No, take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
You ready for the surprise?
Yeah.
Resuming moments like these starts with protecting our kids against COVID-19 and dangerous new variants.
Oh, you miss him.
Get the latest facts by visiting getvaccineanswers.org and speaking to your pediatrician or healthcare provider.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill, bring good home.
Do you love sports? Then you should know about STEM. Because maximizing nutrition, analyzing peak muscle performance, calculating the perfect shot, and more are all made possible by science, technology, engineering, and math. In fact, there are more careers than ever in sports science. So if you have a passion for sports, then think about getting involved in STEM. and improve everyone's game, on and off the field. Get inspired at shecanstem.com.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we're doing a legislative wrap-up with some of our legislators talking about bills and legislation surrounding some of the most vulnerable Virginians in our communities. Thank you so much, Delegate Kim Plum and Senator Barbara Favola, for joining us here on the second segment of the show. Ken, I wanted to ask you about the provisions, and Delegate Helmer alluded to this, about having a pathway to self-sufficiency for people who are on TANF that includes job training, because it's not enough just to give people the things they need, whether it's food or housing. It's a matter of how do we give people the skills necessary to get a living wage job so that they can be self-sufficient.
Well, thank you, Catherine, for that question. It's a question of great interest to me. You know, I spent 30 years of my life working for Fairfax County Public Schools, at which time I was head of the adult education program, and a large part of our mission was to provide job training to local adult citizens. But before I talk more about that, I want to say about the first segment of the show is to all you good self-supporters, we love you and we still need you. If you thought at some point that things were going away and we were on a good course, hopefully we're on a good course, but we really need a lot of shove. So the degree to which you can bring together the members of the faith community and continue your advocacy is so very important. You know, what happens sometimes is people grow up in a circumstance of their own where they have maybe a pretty soft life and things easy for them. And they may forget about the fact that in their community, there are people who have really, really needs, like food, like payment for prescription drugs, like rent payments and so on. And your advocacy over the years to bring to our attention the real situation in our community because of the work that you do to know about that is so very important to us. So don't go away. We need your continued support. We can't do it on our own. And the degree to which we can add faces and names and stories to these programs that we're advocating for, it strengthens our hands to be able to do that. Part of that, of course, is that in our community, we continue to have a growing economy in Northern Virginia. Lots of construction going on, for example, and construction jobs are well paid. But the thing being is you need some skills in order to get those jobs. There's a couple of ways in which in our Northern Virginia communities you can do that. And one is right on through our public schools. Parents, if your children are interested in learning a trade, as opposed to going to a more formal four-year college program, talk to them about that because they might have really a very good idea. I had a son, for example, who was interested in auto mechanics, and he went on to be very successful and continues to be very successful. He would not have been very successful, I don't believe, if he'd gone to college because that was not his interest. So when you have young people in high school programs and so on, look towards the possibility of their entering trade programs. But the schools also open those shops and programs for evening enrollment. So you can have people who either whether in a dream category or whether there's folks who have not finished a formal education or people who are in a office job and say, I want out of this. There are opportunities for learning about being an electrician or being a heating and air conditioning person who make, incidentally, great money. All these jobs are very well paying. And a whole host of carpentry, bricklaying, and so on are opportunities. And we have in the state government tried to promote the greater use of our facilities by having them open for longer periods of the day and evening so that people who do not have skills can get them. We mentioned on the first segment, and I want to emphasize again what's happening at the community college level. Again, a place where you can either get a degree program or you can get a certificate program. And particularly in the high skill areas where there are job demands, through the G3 program. It's get training, get a job, and give back. It's what 3G is all about. You go to a community college program that's in high demand. Healthcare for programs, for example, are in high demand. You can get training that gives you a certificate that is applicable to the marketplace. Get yourself a job, make a good living, and give back. That program is free. Doesn't cost you any tuition to be able to do that. So it's a great program that's just now in place and is available to people. And I hope if you know of people in the community who want to avail themselves of that, to do so. I will tell you that among the issues of controversy in the legislature, it tends not to be ones of where we talk about people getting jobs and getting skills and getting paid. That doesn't seem to be too controversial, as it should not be. But we need to make sure that our community knows about the programs and avails themselves of it. So, Catherine, thank you for having me on. And again, thanks to the folks of SALT for the important work that you do.
Thank you, Ken. I know you've got to run, but this has been very helpful. And I think what we're talking about too is the programs may be available, but it doesn't help if people don't know about them. And so in some of our communities where people are not necessarily native English speakers, or they are new to communities and don't have a pathway to knowing that these programs exist, and some of them are at low cost or no cost at all. And so it's incumbent, whether it's through nonprofits or it's through some government-based program, outreach program, there are people who need jobs. There are employers desperate for skilled employees. And I think Senator Favola pointed out that in healthcare, but particularly behavioral health care and mental health care, there are not enough people to go around. You know, I remember talking, I think it was to Monty Mason, about the fact that we should be incentivizing people to go into behavioral health. There is such a shortage of people, and certainly across Virginia, in the rural parts of Southwest Virginia, there simply aren't enough psychologists, psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, behavioral therapists, cognitive therapists. There just aren't enough people there. So the question is, or a challenge in Virginia is, how do we take the people who need skills, put them together with the programs that can give them skills, and send them to the places that are desperately need a skilled labor force. So thank you so much, Ken. I'm going to now pitch this over to Senator Favola. I'm sure you have thoughts on this and more about what we can do to produce more skilled workforce here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You're on mute. There you go.
Okay, Catherine, thank you for the question. It is incredibly important, and it's something that has really commanded a lot of attention of lawmakers. So we're approaching it in a multifaceted way. Certainly, we're going to try to make more scholarship dollars available, especially to students who represent groups that are underrepresented in the behavioral health tracks. We're also going to try to, we've got dollars in the budget, both House and Senate budgets, to increase the salaries of workers in our state mental health institutions, which matters. And one thing that probably is unknown to many people is individuals who go through the counseling tracks, for them to get their clinical license, they have to pay a professional to supervise them. So that's an out-of-pocket cost for these students who really don't have any resources, and yet they can't get licensed in a clinic with a clinical license without having, so many
I had no idea. I had no idea.
Yeah. So we're working on that aspect too. I just think we have to provide the tools to enable everybody in our community to pursue a dream that is important to he or she. I mean, we all flourish when we're doing our very best, when folks feel that they're doing something they're passionate about, and we've got such incredible need. To me, it's an investment in our future. It's an investment in our safety net. It's an investment in our healthcare system, which we all access, we do want care immediately. We don't want to wait. The state's putting a lot of money into the Step Up Virginia. So community service boards throughout the Commonwealth will be able to provide mental health interventions immediately. But again, that takes staff and it takes case management. We're really studying the intersection of the criminal justice system and mental health. For example, I did get a bill passed and the governor signed it. And I'm very proud of this bill. It actually will require the state to enter a contract with an alternative transport provider for individuals who are under temporary detention orders, TDOs. So we don't have to rely on law enforcement, and law enforcement won't be populating our emergency rooms, which is not a good look. It's not a welcoming look. So that, I gave you sort of a broad brush. There's some nuances in the bill, of course, but I gave you a broad brush explanation of what the bill will do. And it'll be a welcome piece of legislation. It will better serve our individuals who are patients under TDOs, and it will free up the time of law enforcement folks as well. So we're learning. Diversion is a diversion from jails. If an individual is suffering a mental health crisis, is something that our communities in Nova have really embraced. And now we're trying to build the infrastructure to make that diversion goal truly possible.
And I can appreciate that in legislation that works for all Virginians. And as I said, it's got to work for employers. It's got to work for people who want skilled jobs that pay a living wage so that they can support themselves and their families. All of this should be the foundation of what our legislature is actually focusing on. I want to welcome Barbara Smith to the show. She is the program manager of trades and industrial education for Fairfax County. Thank you so much, Barbara, for being here.
Good afternoon.
So when we were talking about, what we have been talking about is the fact that we've got to find a way of providing training to people who are already taking advantage of programs like TANF so that they can continue to get their TANF support while they are getting an education and on a path to self-sufficiency. So give us some insight on what your role is in providing some of this.
So my role right now is in secondary. So definitely trying to get the students before they graduate, and hopefully that information will reach out to some of their family members as well. But definitely making sure that our students are coming out skilled, knowledgeable, how to access information in order for them to be more equipped for the system. Definitely more, understanding like economics and finance, understanding your finances because it's a required course. A lot of those skills, I was just talking to Sherm, and we need to make sure that our students have transferable skills. How is it that they can learn through our classes and also transfer it to different jobs if necessary, or different career pathways? So my goal is to help our teachers, of course, to keep updated, help make sure our programs are updated, going to conferences, having professional development, bringing partnerships into the schools to make sure we are understanding the industry and what is needed in the industry. Our goal is to make sure that the students are a couple of steps ahead of the industry versus 10 years behind when they enter the industry. And again, hopefully that is a ripple effect once they're graduating, whether they go straight into the workforce, they go to community college or a private education provider. We want them to be doing something. We want them somewhere being lifelong learners and continuing their education. So a lot of that is not just content, but also the work ethic, the skills that they need for them to continue work in their community.
Well, you've touched on several interesting things here. One of them is this idea of soft skills. Yes. Teaching skills that you carry into the workplace, no matter what your work is, and making sure that things like being able to communicate effectively, to be able to write an email, to manage people, to have a high emotional intelligence, which a lot of CEOs will tell you is the thing most lacking is a high EQ.
Yes.
So all of these things are soft skills. But my question for you is, there's an old axiom that you can't be what you can't see.
Yes.
And Senator Favola was talking about the fact that, there's a lot of jobs in behavioral health. But how do students in high school understand that the potential job market, the potential for what they can be and do is far beyond what their personal experience is? I mean, do you find that this is really a challenge in trying to help them think about careers they want to pursue?
So the more they're exposed to it, whether we take them there or we bring in the guest speakers or we bring in businesses and partnerships on the inside, it has to be consistent. If we're just talking about just the message to students, that's not enough. We know at that level, they're not mature to even understand sometimes what we're saying. So that's where we have to have that continuous support until they graduate. We need the parent support. We need the community support. They need to know when they leave high school, we're just not throwing them into the world. So how do we create those alignments for them? Kind of let's usher you into this path of workforce if that's what you're interested in. I'm also over military education, and they call it leadership education, also development for students, JROTC, as some may know it. But that's another form of going into the workforce. So how do we then usher them into different career pathways? Again, we need the community. We need our parents. We need everyone involved in making sure they're going in the right direction. So they have to be able to see it, not just sit in the classroom and don't understand how does that look like. We have to do those simulations for them in the classroom and then take them out. And we have a work-based learning initiative in Virginia where that is the whole purpose and the whole goal. How do we mirror what we learned and then actually put it into action? The key is application. And honestly, in high school, that's where they need to know, do I really want to do this or not? You don't want them spending 4 or 5 years or 6 years in college and decide, I don't think I like this. So definitely.
When you think about, and this is kind of the whole argument around student debt too, it's kind of like you invest in a 4-year college education, you get out, you're burdened with a tremendous amount of debt, and you may end up in a job where you can't even pay the debt off.
Exactly.
Not to mention it may have been the wrong degree to get.
Exactly.
So there's some private programs like Genesis Works and Year Up are 2 local programs that work with students 18 to 24. And one of the things with those programs that is interesting to me is finding corporate partners, because an experientially based apprenticeship tells people right away, like if a student really likes working for a particular corporation in a particular field, they're far more likely to say, okay, I feel confident that I'm going to expend time and energy and effort to do this particular thing, whether it's IT or it's healthcare or whatever it is. But those are just like private programs. They're nonprofit programs. Right. And did you see a way that could ever be scaled in some way to have more partnerships through something like public education?
Definitely. We also partner with every, at least in Virginia, every area of Virginia has an adult education through adult education grants, through our Virginia Department of Education and through federal grants. So there's plenty of education out there that are partnering. Department of Labor and Industry, great partnership with them where they're enlisting all the companies to, be a partner in the education. Where are you going to get your skilled workers? I also worked in Richmond, and honestly, some of the grants or some of the funding, they had to make sure that they had a company and organization or partnership so that the students can then transition with that partner. It's almost education and partnership and workforce goes hand in hand. If we don't have that collaboration, then they can't live solo by themselves. We need each other.
No, and there's skills like Upskill America that also is a national program. And to me, fundamentally, what has made that work is corporate partners willing to hire out of the program. Yes. I do want to turn this to Senator Favola to talk about the 23 community colleges across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the fact that, there seems to be a drop in enrollment that seems to be a tad inexplicable. And so just your thoughts, Senator Vivola, on what we can do to make it more accessible. Is this a matter of outreach? Is it, someone suggested to me one time that if you want to retrain adult workers, put daycare centers at the 23 community colleges, because a lot of single women who are working minimum wage jobs with children, part of the barrier to getting upskilled, retrained, or certified is, what do you do about childcare? So is there a way to look again at the investment we've made in 23 community colleges, and to look at whether there is a way to lower the barriers and increase the outreach so that we are doing better upskilling in every community?
Well, earlier in the program, we did talk about the affordability factor for our most vulnerable Virginians. So you have some information on that. Let me just say, before individuals even get to a community college, there is the dual degree program offered in many of our high schools, which does allow students to get an associate's degree if a student takes all the classes while they're in high school, or to get certified in a trade, or you know, perhaps a beginning track, if you will, that they'll have to then continue in a community college. But this opportunity really enables students to start thinking while they're in high school, and to get a jump start on their education without having to expend additional time and money after high school. So for some students, it is exactly the right thing to do. And I'm proud to say that I have been a factor in funding that dual degree program for several years now. So in terms of getting into the community college, I give our community college system a great deal of credit. They've been very creative in sort of identifying career tracks and identifying credentials that are not the full 2-year degree. And they have been very helpful in entering memorandums of, they call them articulation agreements, with our 4-year state institutions. So students who have, at least a 3.5 GPA at the community college can automatically transfer to a 4-year school. So our community colleges are trying to help folks who really don't want a 2-year degree, but want to do something in the trades. They're also trying to help students who perhaps want a 2-year degree and get out and work for a moment. And then those that want to continue from the 2-year degree to the 4-year degree. So they're really trying to do a lot of things for a lot of different people. They have a high percentage of non-traditional age students. Childcare is always an issue. I would like to see, childcare opportunities and childcare services offered at our community colleges. I think that would be wonderful. So that's certainly an idea we need to pursue. And I think virtual learning now has taken on a life that it didn't have before. So, this virtual learning concept is going to help many students who have to work, who are raising families, who don't have the time for in-person learning.
That's a really good point, and we didn't even touch on that. So, Barbara Smith, are you finding that now that we've gone through 2 years of remote learning, that some of the students who have decided that they want a certification program or some additional learning that leads, to a quicker path to a career, that they're really open to this idea that virtual learning could work for them?
Yes, definitely. Definitely had to engage them virtually, had to help them understand even the technology. We even had classes for them to understand the technology, which is usually the first step, and then for them to continue on with their education. So the virtual world has opened up to a lot of our students, and they're not even, afraid anymore, because everyone is learning almost at the same time. So it's not even a fear factor, where I believe it was a fear factor before. Obviously, a lot of our trades, you have to have the hands-on, but at least you can have the theory classes virtually and online. So that is definitely a plus for our communities.
And do you think that to Senator Favola's point about the dual enrollment,
Yes.
do you find that some of the students that you work with are really open to this idea that you can get your high school diploma while you're simultaneously getting ready to get a certification?
Yes, definitely. It's gotten so much more advanced. It really is another viable option for our students. And again, that's working with our community college and seeing how we can get those dual enrollment for all of, a lot of our classes. I know it's difficult based on some of the accreditation for teachers and the programs, but every day we're looking at, different areas where we can create that dual enrollment option for our students, and even our certification programs. Even if they take a couple of classes here in high school, at least they have the opportunity to complete their certification program or some of their classes at the community college, which is a great transition plan for our students. I'm definitely proud of my daughter who's graduating from VCU, but she did 2 years at J. Sargent Reynolds and then now 2 years at VCU, and she was able to transfer all her credits. And she's just ecstatic. So next Sunday is graduation time, and
congratulations. And
Thank
we
you,
did, and Senator Favola touched on that too.
Yes.
That it's, my brother and my sister both went to Virginia Western Community College before they went to Virginia Tech, and both of them have a degree that says Virginia Tech.
Exactly.
But 2 years at Virginia Western made it affordable.
Yes.
And again, we have to look at the reality of the cost.
Yes.
We have to look at the reality of things like, if you've got a child and you're already working, how do you do that? Virtual is a good answer. And the other thing is transportation. Yes. Some students, having virtual is an option for students who have trouble getting from high school or their home to a community college. And I think transportation is going to continue to be a major hurdle for a lot of things, programs in the Commonwealth.
Yes. I feel like a lot of the grants, though, because I have worked in adult ed, there is a lot of grants out there from Plugged in Virginia. Again, some extensions of the adult education grant that does assist with transportation. And actually, we've tried to set up, when I was in Richmond, a church where they volunteered some of their time to watch the watch the babies while the mothers went to school. So there are different ways to connect with the community for our needs, right away without waiting, to see how it gets.
That gives me a lot of hope, because there's a lot of nonprofits who step up. We've got legislators who are trying to be creative and to do the work and to find the funding and to try to get public policy that meets the needs of more people. Right. I just want to thank both of the Barbaras, Barbara Smith and Senator Barbara Favola, for being on Inside Scoop. This has been enlightening. I do think that looking after the interests of Virginia's most vulnerable people serves our economy. It serves our community, and it serves the people who really want to be successful in Virginia.
Yes.
So thank you both so much for being on the show. For those who want to find past episodes of Inside Scoop, they are on YouTube at youtube.com/Inside Scoop TV show. 10 years worth of past shows if you want to watch them. Thanks so much. Inside Scoop is on Mondays at 8 p.m.